Dad, look at yourself. You're 68 years old, you forget where you put your reading glasses, and you're trying to manage a seven-figure commercial marine repair business with arthritis in your hands. My son Brandon said, tossing a thick blue legal folder onto my mahogany desk. You're simply too old to make decisions anymore. The court petition is filed. By next week, I'll have full legal conservatorship over Sterling Marine Works. I sat behind the desk I had built out of reclaimed white oak 40 years ago, staring into the cold, impatient eyes of the boy I had raised alone after my wife, Eleanor, passed away. Beside Brandon stood his wife, Alyssa, wearing an expensive designer coat and holding a leather handbag that cost more than I used to make in a month of welding ship hulls. "Brandon," I said, keeping my voice low, steady, and quiet. "I started this boatyard in 1984 with 2 toolboxes and a $500 loan. We employ 22 local families. I spoke to our chief accountant yesterday, and our quarterly revenues are the highest they've been in 5 years. What decisions have I made that warrant taking away my legal rights?" "You refused to sign the buyout offer from Apex Harbor Logistics," Alyssa interjected, stepping forward with a cold, practiced smile. "That buyout is worth $3.5 million, Henry. You're holding Brandon back. You're holding us back because you're clinging to nostalgic trash." "Apex wants to bulldoze the repair bays, fire our mechanics, and turn this historic waterfront into private yacht slips for millionaires," I replied, looking directly at my son. "Your grandfather worked these docks, Brandon. These men out in the yard helped pay for your tuition at Georgetown. Selling to Apex isn't a business decision, it's an execution order for this community." Brandon chuckled, a harsh, dismissive sound that cut deeper than any blade. "That's exactly what I mean, Dad. You think with your emotions. You're living in the past. The petition stands. The competency hearing is set for Friday morning at the district courthouse. Dr. Vance, the neurologist we hired, reviewed your medical file from your mild concussion last winter. His affidavit says you suffer from progressive executive dysfunction. You won't win this." He turned on his heel and walked out, Alyssa's high heels clicking sharply against the concrete floor of my office. I sat alone in the quiet room as the evening sun dipped below the harbor horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the framed photographs of Eleanor and a 5-year-old Brandon holding his first fishing rod on the docks. I felt an overwhelming, suffocating weight in my chest. It wasn't just the threat of losing my business. It was the heartbreaking realization that my own flesh and blood viewed my life's work as nothing more than a pile of cash waiting to be harvested. My name is Henry Sterling. For over 40 decades, Sterling Marine Works had been the heartbeat of our coastal town in Maine. We repaired commercial fishing trawlers, tugboats, and emergency Coast Guard vessels. I had sacrificed my knees, my back, and my youth to build a debt-free enterprise. When Eleanor died 12 years ago, Brandon became my entire world. I poured everything into him. I bought him his first car, paid off his mortgage when he married Alyssa, and gave him a 30% non-voting stake in the company so he would always have financial security. I thought I was being a loving father. I didn't realize I was feeding an appetite that would eventually turn around and consume me. The betrayal hadn't started with the legal petition. It had begun 6 months earlier with subtle, poisonous lies. First, small things began disappearing from my desk. Invoices I knew I had stamped appeared in the shredder bin. Supplier contracts were delayed, causing longtime vendors to call me, concerned that Sterling Marine was slipping on payments. "Dad, you must have mislaid the check," Brandon would say smoothly when I confronted him about a delinquent paint supplier bill. "Don't worry, I cleared it up for you. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you should take a few weeks off in Florida."
"I don't need Florida, Brandon," I had told him, searching through my organized filing drawers in confusion. "I've filed these invoices in the same cabinet for 30 years. I know I wrote that check." "Memory plays tricks on us as we get older, Dad," he would reply, patting my shoulder with fake, patronizing warmth. "Just let me handle the banking from now on." I began to doubt myself. I started writing down every conversation in a small pocket notebook. I hid my keys in different places, wondering if my mind really was deteriorating as the years caught up with me. The real trap sprang 3 weeks ago when Brandon brought Dr. Julian Vance to the boatyard under the guise of an occupational safety inspector. Dr. Vance sat in my office for 2 hours asking me casual questions about my daily routine, my late wife, and how often I misplaced my keys. I thought I was participating in a routine insurance audit. 4 days later, that casual chat became a sworn legal affidavit declaring me unfit to manage my financial affairs. The day after Brandon delivered his ultimatum, I went to see my daughter-in-law's brother, Ethan. Ethan was 32, a quiet, brilliant marine engineer whom I had hired 5 years ago to manage our structural testing lab. Unlike Alyssa, Ethan was honest, hardworking, and deeply devoted to the yard. I found Ethan in the dry dock inspecting the steel keel of an old fishing vessel. When he saw me walking toward him, he wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, looking around nervously before pulling me into the tool shed.
"Henry," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling, "you shouldn't be here alone. Alyssa and Brandon were at my house last night. They told me that if I don't sign a statement supporting their conservatorship petition, they'll fire me the second they take over the company." My blood ran cold. "They asked you to lie about my mental state?" "They offered me a $50,000 bonus out of the Apex buyout money," Ethan said, tears of shame glistening in his eyes. "Henry, I refused. I told them you're as sharp as anyone on these docks." But Alyssa laughed in my face. She said they already have the bank manager and Dr. Vance in their pocket. "The bank manager?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What does Marcus Cole at Harbor National Bank have to do with this?" Ethan hesitated, biting his lip before pulling out his phone. "I wasn't supposed to see this, but Brandon left a closing binder on my workbench yesterday. Henry, Brandon didn't just apply for a conservatorship. He took out a secret $2 million short-term bridge loan from Harbor National 6 months ago, using his 30% non-voting stock as collateral." I reeled back, clutching the edge of a workbench. A $2 million loan? For what? Julian, Alyssa's husband, got involved in an offshore crypto investment scheme that failed, Ethan revealed, his voice shaking. They owe high-interest private lenders over $1.8 million. The deadline is next Monday. If Brandon doesn't deliver the deed to Sterling Marine Works to Apex Logistics by Friday afternoon to trigger the $3.5 million buyout, Harbor National is going to seize Brandon's stock and declare his loan in default. They're not trying to put you in a care home because they think you're old, Henry. They're doing it because if they don't sell your life's work by Friday, Brandon is going to prison for commercial loan fraud. The truth hit me like a rogue wave breaking over a sinking ship. It was never about my health. It was never about my age. It was a desperate, panicked robbery executed by my own son to cover up his criminal stupidity. He was willing to strip away my freedom, declare me insane, and destroy 22 families' livelihoods just to save himself from the consequences of his own greed. I walked out of the tool shed, the chilly ocean breeze stinging my eyes. I didn't cry,
The pain was too deep for tears, a cold, hollow ache that settled deep into my bones. "What are you going to do, Henry?" Ethan asked, following me out onto the gravel path. "I'm going to see an old friend," I said softly. An hour later, I was sitting in a modest, book-lined office 3 towns over, across from Samuel Albright. Samuel was 74, a retired maritime attorney who had represented my father 40 years ago. He was retired, slow-moving, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. I laid out everything: Dr. Vance's affidavit, Brandon's secret $2 million bridge loan, the upcoming Friday competency hearing, and the impending Apex buyout. Samuel listened silently, puffing on an unlit pipe, his weathered face creased in deep thought as he read through Brandon's legal petition. "Henry," Samuel said slowly, his deep voice filled with solemn gravity, "Dr. Vance's affidavit is a powerful piece of paper in a probate court. If Brandon presents a medical opinion alongside a bank default warning, Judge Hargrove might grant a temporary emergency conservatorship for 30 days. In those 30 days, Brandon, as temporary conservator, can execute the Apex buyout contract. Once that land is sold and demolished, no court on earth can undo it." "So he wins?" I said, looking down at my calloused, grease-stained hands. "My own son uses the law to lock me out of my own life." Samuel didn't answer immediately. He stood up, walked over to a heavy iron safe built into the brick wall of his office, and spun the combination dial. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio tied with a faded red cotton ribbon. "Henry," Samuel said, placing the portfolio gently on the desk between us, "do you remember 32 years ago, in 1994, when your father passed away and we reorganized Sterling Marine Works from a sole proprietorship into a commercial corporate structure?" "I remember," I nodded, frowning. "I paid off my brother's share and took full ownership." Samuel untied the red ribbon and opened the yellowed parchment pages. "Your father was a wise man, Henry," Samuel said, a faint, sharp glint appearing in his eyes. "He knew that maritime businesses are vulnerable to family disputes, sudden deaths, and hostile corporate takeovers. When we drafted the 1994 reorganization charter, your father insisted on inserting a specific conditional governance clause under Section 12, subsection C." I leaned forward, my heart beating faster. "What clause?" Samuel pointed a thin, age-spotted finger at a paragraph of fine print, stamped with a faded red corporate seal. "It is known as the Heritage Preservation Clause," Samuel read aloud, his voice steady and resolute. "It states, in the event that any shareholder or designated heir attempts an involuntary transfer, legal encumbrance, or forced liquidation of corporate assets through civil incapacity proceedings or external debt leverage, all voting rights, stock allocations, and administrative proxies associated with said heir shall immediately revert to a special voting trust governed exclusively by the master shipwright holding the original founding deed." I stared at the paper, my breath catching in my throat. The master shipwright? That's me.
"It gets better," Samuel smiled wolfishly. "The clause goes further. Furthermore, any external loan, mortgage, or financial pledge made using company stock as collateral without the unanimous, written, notarized consent of the master shipwright is rendered legally null, void, and non-enforceable against the corporation's real estate titles." I sat frozen in my chair as the monumental weight of his words sank in. Brandon's $2 million bridge loan? is completely illegal under corporate charter law, Samuel finished, closing the portfolio with a firm snap. Harbor National Bank had a legal duty to inspect the 1994 reorganization charter before issuing a loan against Brandon's stock. Marcus Cole failed to do his due diligence because he was eager to collect high loan fees from your son. So Brandon doesn't own 30% of the company? I asked. The moment Brandon filed that conservatorship petition against you on Tuesday, Section 12, subsection C triggered automatically. His 30% stock was instantly stripped of all voting power and transferred into your sole, irrevocable voting trust. He doesn't hold a single share with standing to petition the court as an interested corporate party. A profound, overwhelming sense of relief washed over me, immediately followed by a deep, lingering sadness. "What do we do now, Samuel?" I asked softly. Samuel looked at me with fierce, uncompromising judicial resolve. We let Brandon bring his high-priced lawyers, his crooked doctor, and his apex buyer to the courthouse on Friday morning. We let him lay out his entire web of lies before Judge Hargrove, and then we let the judge read the forgotten clause. For the next 2 days, I maintained a complete front of helpless, heartbroken defeat. When Brandon called to ask if I had packed my personal belongings out of the boatyard office, I spoke in a quiet, trembling voice. I told him I was tired, that my knees hurt, and that I didn't have the strength to fight him in court. Brandon was ecstatic. Arrogance completely blinded him. Arrogance convinced him that his father was crushed, broken, and ready to be swept away into a quiet retirement home. Friday morning arrived. A thick morning fog hung over the harbor as I put on my dark wool suit, the same suit I had worn to Eleanor's funeral 12 years ago. At 9 o'clock, I walked into courtroom 3B of the Lincoln County District Courthouse. Sitting on the petitioner's side of the aisle were Brandon, Alyssa, Dr. Julian Vance, Marcus Cole from Harbor National Bank, and 2 senior corporate attorneys representing Apex Harbor Logistics. They occupied 2 entire rows, surrounded by thick leather binders, laptops, and glossy development blueprints for the luxury yacht marina. Brandon looked immaculate in a tailored gray suit, leaning over to whisper triumphantly to Alyssa, who was smiling like a queen about to claim her crown. When I walked in alongside Samuel Albright and Ethan, Brandon didn't even look concerned. He looked at me with pity, the condescending pity of a victor looking at a conquered enemy. Judge Hargrove, a stern 65-year-old woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, took her bench and banged her gavel. "We are here in the matter of the emergency petition for involuntary conservatorship over Henry Sterling, filed by Brandon Sterling," Judge Hargrove announced, adjusting her reading glasses. "Petitioner, state your case." Brandon's high-priced lead attorney, Mr. Richard Hayes, stood up, smoothing his jacket. "Your Honor," Hayes began, his voice dripping with practiced authority, "we are here today on an urgent matter of elder protection and asset preservation. Mr. Henry Sterling, at age 68, is demonstrating severe cognitive decline, executive disorientation, and an inability to manage the complex financial realities of Sterling Marine Works. We have a sworn affidavit from Dr. Julian Vance confirming progressive neurological decay. Furthermore, the company faces immediate insolvency unless a pending $3.5 million acquisition by Apex Logistics is executed by 5 o'clock today." Judge Hargrove turned her gaze toward me, her expression neutral. "Mr. Sterling, you are represented by counsel today?" Samuel Albright stood up slowly, leaning on his wooden cane, his voice calm, clear, and unhurried.
I am Samuel Albright, Your Honor, representing Henry Sterling and Sterling Marine Works, Incorporated, Samuel said smoothly. We strongly oppose this petition. In fact, we move for an immediate dismissal with prejudice on the grounds that the petitioner lacks legal standing to file under corporate governance law.
Brandon's lawyer laughed openly. Your Honor, the petitioner is Henry Sterling's biological son and holds a 30% ownership stake in the enterprise. He has absolute legal standing. Does he? Samuel asked quietly. Samuel walked up to the clerk's bench and handed Judge Hargrove a certified, gold-stamped document portfolio. Your Honor, Samuel declared, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom, what you have before you is the certified 1994 reorganization charter of Sterling Marine Works, Incorporated, registered in this very county 32 years ago. Judge Hargrove opened the portfolio, her eyes scanning the yellowed parchment pages. I direct the court's attention to page 14, section 12, subsection C, Samuel continued, pointing toward the document, the Heritage Preservation Clause. Brandon frowned, leaning forward, whispering frantically to Alyssa, What is he talking about? What clause? Judge Hargrove began reading aloud from the document, her authoritative voice filling the courtroom. In the event that any shareholder or designated heir attempts an involuntary transfer, legal encumbrance, or forced liquidation of corporate assets through civil incapacity proceedings or external debt leverage, all voting rights, stock allocations, and administrative proxies associated with said heir shall immediately revert to a special voting trust governed exclusively by the master shipwright. Judge Hargrove stopped. She looked up over her glasses, her eyes locking onto Brandon with icy intensity. Furthermore, Judge Hargrove read on, her voice growing colder with every word, any external loan, mortgage, or financial pledge made using company stock as collateral without the unanimous, written, notarized consent of the master shipwright is rendered legally null, void, and non-enforceable. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. You could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock behind the judge's bench. Marcus Cole, the manager from Harbor National Bank, went dead pale. He stood up so fast his chair screeched against the hardwood floor. Wait, Your Honor, our bank issued a $2 million bridge loan secured by that 30% stock. Then your bank committed gross legal negligence by failing to inspect the foundational corporate charter of the company you lent against, Mr. Cole, Samuel Albright snapped back, his voice cutting through the room like a broadsword. Under subsection C, the moment Brandon Sterling filed his conservatorship petition on Tuesday morning, his 30% stock was automatically stripped of all voting power and transferred into Henry Sterling's voting trust. Brandon Sterling holds zero legal interest, zero corporate standing, and zero authority to bring this petition before your court. No, that's impossible! Brandon screamed, jumping up from his seat, his face flushed with bright red fury. Dad, tell them! You can't do this to me! Sit down, Mr. Sterling, Judge Hargrove barked, slamming her gavel onto the wooden block with a sound like a gunshot. Sit down, or I will have the bailiff place you in cuffs for contempt. Alyssa was shaking, clutching Brandon's arm, her voice cracking into high-pitched panic. Brandon, what about the $2 million? What about the debt? The lead attorney for Apex Logistics stood up, looking at Brandon with absolute disgusted contempt. Your Honor, Apex Logistics hereby formally withdraws its acquisition offer for Sterling Marine Works. We were presented with fraudulent representations regarding title authority. The Apex attorneys packed their laptops into their leather bags and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Judge Hargrove looked down at Brandon, her face dark with moral outrage. Mr. Sterling,
Judge Hargrove said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You came into my courtroom claiming your father was mentally unfit to manage his life. But what this court sees before it is an ambitious, greedy son who committed loan fraud, conspired with an unethical physician, and attempted to strip his own father of his constitutional rights to cover up his own financial crimes." Judge Hargrove picked up her pen and struck a heavy black line across the legal file. "The petition for conservatorship is hereby dismissed with prejudice," Judge Hargrove ruled, slamming her gavel down. "Furthermore, this court is referring the medical affidavit submitted by Dr. Julian Vance to the State Medical Board for immediate fraud investigation, and referring Mr. Brandon Sterling and Mr. Marcus Cole to the District Attorney's Financial Crimes Unit."
"Dad, please!" Brandon cried out, rushing toward the wooden railings separating the gallery from the bench, tears streaming down his face as the bailiff stepped in front of him. "Dad, they're going to arrest me. Harbor National will call the loan. I'll lose my house. I'll go to prison. Please, Dad, you have to save me. I'm your son." I stood up slowly from my chair, leaning on my cane. I walked over to the wooden railing and looked my 35-year-old son in the eyes. The emotional power shift was absolute. The arrogant, cold young man who had stood in my office 3 days ago, telling me I was too old to make decisions, was now a sobbing, broken wreck, begging the father he had betrayed to rescue him from his own grave. "I loved you, Brandon," I said, my voice quiet, trembling with a heartbreaking, quiet dignity. "I gave you my youth, my hard work, and my trust. If you had come to me, if you had been honest about your debts, I would have helped you. I would have worked extra shifts to help you pay off your mistakes. But you didn't want my help. You wanted to declare me insane and destroy everything your mother and I built." "Dad, I'm sorry. I was desperate. Alyssa pressured me." Brandon wept, grabbing at the wooden railing, his hands shaking violently. "A man makes his own choices, Brandon," I whispered, tears finally slipping down my cheeks. "And a man lives with the consequences. You said I was too old to make decisions, but today the law made the decision for both of us." I turned my back on my son. I walked out of courtroom 3B alongside Samuel Albright and Ethan, leaving Brandon's frantic, hysterical cries echoing off the marble walls behind us. The legal and personal fallout was absolute. Within 3 months, the district attorney filed formal criminal charges against Brandon for commercial loan fraud, falsification of corporate records, and attempted elder financial exploitation. To avoid a long prison sentence, Brandon entered a guilty plea to reduced felony charges. He received 3 years of strict probation, was ordered to pay restitution, and was forced to declare personal bankruptcy. Alyssa filed for divorce 6 weeks after the court hearing, taking what little remained of their personal property and moving back to Boston. Dr. Julian Vance had his medical license permanently suspended by the State Medical Board for executing fraudulent medical affidavits. Marcus Cole was quietly terminated from his position at Harbor National Bank for gross negligence and regulatory violations. Brandon tried to call me twice from a public phone during his probation. He left a long, sobbing voicemail begging to come back to the boatyard, promising he would sweep the floors, promising he had changed. I listened to the message twice in my quiet office, holding the phone in my hand, tears falling onto my oak desk. But I never called back. Some trust, once shattered into 1,000 pieces, can never be pieced back together. The bridge had burned down to ash, and no amount of regret could rebuild it. With Ethan's help as our new Vice President of Engineering, Sterling Marine Works flourished. We signed a new 5-year contract with the State Ferry Authority, securing the jobs of our 22 mechanics for years to come.
One quiet, crisp evening in early October, the sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and violet across the harbor. The sound of air chisels and welding arcs had died down as the last shift of mechanics headed home to their families. I walked out onto the wooden pier, carrying a warm mug of black coffee. The tide was gently lapping against the timber pilings below. Splush, wash, splush, wash. I walked to the end of the pier, where an old wooden fishing boat, the very first vessel my father and I had repaired together in 1984, sat tied to the mooring posts, its freshly painted blue hull gleaming under the evening sky. I sat down on a wooden bench at the end of the dock, taking a slow sip of hot coffee, feeling the cool ocean air fill my lungs. I had won the war. I had saved my business, my dignity, and the livelihoods of 22 good families. I had proven that an older man's wisdom and a father's foresight are stronger than any young man's arrogance. But as I sat alone on the pier, watching the light fade over the dark open water, a quiet, lingering tear slipped down my cheek and fell into the sea. I looked down at my worn, calloused hands, hands that welded steel, built ships, and cradled a baby boy 35 years ago. I had saved my legacy, my boatyard, and my freedom. But as the quiet stars began to shine brightly over the harbor, I realized the sad, unshakable truth that no victory in any courtroom could ever heal. I had saved my life's work, but I had lost my son forever. I leaned back against the wooden bench, pulled my wool coat tight against the night chill, and listened to the peaceful, heartbreaking sound of the ocean waves singing over the land I had fought so hard to keep.